John Lorden here. Happy Monday, July 30th, 2018. Welcome to your week's episode of Brain Scratch, Case Cracked. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here today. I've got a mystery to start your week off. This one I call, Who Am I? The Story of Alicia Stancil. Connecticut, 2014. A woman walked into a hospital. She was disoriented and had no identification. A nurse asked her several questions about herself that she just didn't seem to have the answers for. Answers that were left behind 20 years ago and over 2,500 miles away. Phoenix, Arizona, December 19th, 1994. Toni Stancil had previously been in the Air Force, but life took a turn and now she was struggling. Drug addiction and prostitution were the norm, and she knew her 9-month-old baby daughter, Alicia, didn't need to be around a mother like this. Toni took her baby to a friend, a woman she only knew as Dee. Toni told Dee that she just needed some time to clear her head and left. She didn't come back in a few minutes, hours, or even after a day. When she did come back, 2 days later, both Dee and Alicia were gone. Toni's spiral continued, and she ended up in jail a short time later. In March of 1995, 4 months since she last saw her daughter, she filed a missing persons report. Why did she wait so long? Was she thinking that her daughter was being cared for? Did the guilt of leaving her baby behind finally get to her, especially as her daughter's first birthday came and went? We will never be able to find out the answers to those questions. Toni Stancil was murdered later that same year. Her case is still unsolved, and the case of her missing child would go cold. In 2008, cold case detectives created a DNA profile using genetic material from living relatives. At least if Alicia was found, they would have a definitive way to identify her. A new age progression photo was made of Alicia and circulated to the press. In 2009, a detective from the Phoenix Police Department would email the Charlie Project, and Megan took the opportunity to ask about Alicia's case. She was told that Toni Stancil was a crack addict, and that her reporting her baby missing may have been nothing more than her trying to get out of jail. The detective also told Megan that the case simply fell through the cracks. They had one very weak lead, trying to track down someone simply known as Dee. Quote, "Without that one and only witness, I'm very limited in how to proceed with the investigation," said Detective William Anderson with the Phoenix Police Missing Persons Unit in a television interview. The detective would end his messages to Megan by stating his hope was that Alicia was being raised by another family. Megan agreed that would be the best outcome and wrote a blog post to once again try to raise exposure to the case. In the comments below the blog, Megan even wondered if baby Alicia existed at all, or if she was simply made up to try to get Toni out of jail. Back to that hospital in Connecticut in 2014. The nurse didn't feel right about this young woman and the lack of info she had about her own life. The nurse started looking into missing persons cases that fit the age range of the mysterious patient. She came across an age progression photo from a baby's picture that went missing at 9 months old. Would an age progression photo based off a baby picture and then adding 20 years even be accurate? The nurse thought it was worth a shot and contacted the police. The young woman submitted DNA to see if she was this baby that had gone missing, named Alicia. She waited and didn't hear back. Hope would shift to doubt as 1 year passed with no result, then another year, and another. Then came the call. 3 years after submitting the DNA test, the mysterious patient who was lucky enough to find a caring nurse that was willing to go the extra mile would have her answer and her name. She was Alicia Stancil, and she was from the other side of the country. Back in 1994, she was handed off from family to family until she wound up in police custody. Perhaps if her mother would have filed the report as soon as she returned, they could have been reunited. But considering her mother's fate, you have to wonder if it was luck or divine intervention that kept this baby away from a situation that would ultimately take her mother's life. By the time her mother reported her missing in March of '95, now 1-year-old Aleacia was in the care of Child Protective Services. Again, the missing persons report and the unidentified baby would not connect. Alicia wound up being adopted and raised under a different name. Phoenix Police Sergeant Armando Carbajal commented on the cold case getting closed. Quote, "This was obviously an outstanding example of how Phoenix police detectives and National Center for Missing and Exploited Children work together, and that no case is ever put on the shelf. Even after 20 plus years, happy outcomes can come." How exactly is this a happy outcome? Alicia has found her grandmother, and they've met in person. Grandmother Frances Ford says Alicia wishes to stay out of the spotlight, and all media sources have since kept her new name private. Her grandmother did state that Alicia's life growing up was complicated and confusing. Frances also stated that she hoped to one day have a close relationship with her granddaughter. I would want the world to know that these are the things that can happen to kids, and not every story is not a happily ever after. And it doesn't mean that they came from someone who didn't want them or didn't care, Ford said. Case cracked. So it's been interesting reading comments about this case. It's been written a lot about in the media over the past few days in particular. And the comments on this are ranging all over the place. Most people, of course, are happy that this young woman finally knows where she came from. Of course, it's a bit bittersweet knowing more about her mother and her mother's fate and her mother's lifestyle. But around all that, there's some commentary about the DNA test and why the heck did it take 3 years? And quite honestly, I haven't seen anyone address that. For as many media sources as I've seen reporting this, I would love if just, one or two of those reporters would actually try to get a comment from someone in a position of authority about why those results took 3 years. I can't imagine that type of wait. And unfortunately, Alicia isn't speaking for herself, so we really don't know what that wait was like. And of course, we don't know what challenges she went through in terms of her younger upbringing. Will that information ever become public? I don't know. In some cases, some people decide to speak up later. In a case like this, it's just, there's really no telling for sure. But in any case, I'm happy that she has the answer to that. I'm happy that she has some new family that she didn't know about. And I'm hopeful that her and her grandmother are able to develop some type of relationship. That's got to be a really tough situation to be in as well. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to the Charlie Project. I really appreciate Megan's work there. I'm a bit of a fan of hers. As you guys know, the Charlie Project frequently comes up in my research on Searchlight. The thing that I love the most about the Charlie Project, I think, is not only do they give you a clear kind of synopsis of what the case is, but Megan does a great job pulling together photographs from all over the place. She gets some of the best composites in terms of all the available photos of the missing people, and that is so important. That's actually another really cool aspect of this case, is to know that a composite sketch based off the baby's picture, and then of course I'm sure that they looked at family members to try to determine how the baby might look as she got older. It's amazing to me that this nurse was able to find that composite, first of all, that it looked enough like Alicia to make that identification positive. And then of course they were able to close it out by actually doing the DNA test, even if it took 3 years. I'm just happy that they got it done. So hopefully things like that will speed up nowadays. Maybe even that story will help in terms of places being more aware of this type of testing and trying to push it through a little quicker, because it really seems to me that 3 years is a long time to wait for an answer on an investigation that involves a missing person, let alone a missing baby. Admittedly, a cold case, but still, I don't think it's any less important to get those results in. So it's comment time. Let's talk about April Tinsley, the case that we covered last week here on Case Cracked. Starting with a comment from, I think it's Deverique13. There are many reasons why the suspects will become involved in some way during the investigation. Some try to mislead the detectives or gain knowledge of what they know, kind of a way to know when to run. Others most commonly become involved as a sadistic way to continue living the crime. Daverique 13, yeah, absolutely. Those are all the same conditions that I'm aware of for them becoming involved. I do wonder how much of it is the sadism angle that you're talking about. Is there some kind of kick that they're getting from seeing the family member, seeing what they're going through, and then having that secret of theirs, that they're really the person that's being looked for. But no doubt outside of that, the logistics of knowing where the investigation is heading, definitely a benefit to them, certainly a motivating factor for them to want to be closer to the investigation as opposed to just trying to ignore things and hoping someone doesn't come knocking on their door. Thankfully, with what we're seeing in terms of DNA analysis lately, seems like a lot more people should be afraid of that knock on their door. Speaking of, let's continue with Serene Moon. I'm very torn between loving justice for the victims and not liking this invasion of privacy. Dishonest government does not need much encouragement to take away more and more of our rights, always in the guise of things like this. Pretending help while true intent is harm and control. Serene, I'm with you. There's certainly some things that we need to be cautious of here. I do think that we have a bit of a unique situation here because we're talking about a system that people are donating their DNA to willingly. It's going to be quite different if at some point there is some type of DNA collection that is happening as a state mandate or as a government mandate. You know, basically as soon as you're born, your DNA is cataloged somewhere and then they have access to that. That's going to be a very interesting thing to cross. Do I think it's going to happen? Quite honestly, something in me says, yeah, I do think we're going to get to the point where everyone is kind of cataloged by their DNA. Even the possibility of that could be happening currently in some bizarre way that we're just not aware of. So yeah, I do think that there are some privacy concerns here, but I also struggle with that because as I've talked about on other videos, we're leaving our DNA all over the place. I mean, there's touch DNA now. If you simply touch something for long enough, you've left a trace of yourself. If you're doing that in a public area, if you have some hair falling out or you leave a bottle of water that you've been drinking out of, you've left traces of your DNA in public areas. So if we do expect privacy for that type of information, I think there's going to have to be other things that we do to make sure that that privacy is maintained. But yeah, it gets kind of 1984 when you're talking and thinking about this enough and you're thinking about, hey, every baby that's born, why aren't they just kind of snapshotting their DNA at that point? And do you think the government would be up for doing something like that? Sure seems like a pretty good control mechanism. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm leery about it. However, as was seen in the replies to this comment, where a pretty good conversation was happening. Unfortunately, it turned a little bit for some people that were a little emotional about it. Solving these crimes is very, very important. We're doing it with a system with GED Match where it is information that is donated to that system. So I think we are in a pretty safe space in terms of these crimes being solved this way. If that mechanism changes to some kind of system that's being tapped where that information has been collected in an unethical manner, things are going to shift with these cases being solved that way. It's weird though, because I know there's some people out there that'll say, no matter what, solve these cases. All you're doing is bringing bad people to justice, and I see that side of it too. So even myself, I'm struggling on this. Leah Da Vinci also struggling on this. I'm torn. The constitutionalist in me screams, never use a genealogy site, never give up your DNA. Warrants are meant for things like this. And I worry that this sort of technology will make our investigators lazy. But the mother in me is happy that justice is being served. I don't know. Will it actually make them lazy? I think what we're seeing, at least on the outset of this trend, and admittedly we're just at the start of it, is we're seeing that it's making them effective. And if a crime scene is just a matter of collecting DNA that makes sense for that to be from the actual person committing the crime, as long as they're doing that in a safe and transparent way, I don't know if I would necessarily consider that lazy, but there is some risk around all this that I've also kind of touched on in some other videos. What if the DNA that's being collected is not from a situation where it's actually from the criminal? What if they're, for example, doing a rape kit and, well, a rape kit might be a little different because you can typically see damage in the term in a sexual assault like that. But let's assume that there was some willing contact between two people. There was DNA that was transferred. One of those people winds up dead. The DNA is analyzed, and all of a sudden they think they've got their culprit. I think that's where the court processes come in. I don't know that DNA is always going to be the solo answer to getting the convictions. That's actually part of this that we haven't seen yet. We've got these cases that have supposedly been cracked, but we haven't seen any of them actually get through the legal process using this method. So we still have a little bit of a hoop and a big learning curve, I think, to see how this is going to be handled from the legal end. I'm hopeful that it's going to go well, but quite honestly, you never know. There could be unforeseen developments in this. Vicky Noeski, Parabon's testing results are as close to a miracle as I've seen lately. Rest in peace, April. Very sweet sentiment, Vicky. And yeah, I feel the same way. Even if there is something in terms of the legal aspect that stops this information from being entered for some reason or helping with the actual conviction, in terms of an investigative tool, almost something more along the lines of a polygraph test, we know this is a very strong investigative tool because it could point them in a very specific direction. You know, this person was in that hotel room. This person was in that apartment. We know that they were there. So now let's find the information to support why they were there, what they did when they were there. Is there DNA on the weapon that was used, whatever. I think this is the start of something very interesting in terms of these investigations. I was really happy to hear that Parabon has done so many tests already and that they're having such a strong result. Do you know what I would do to see half of the cases that I've covered on this channel solved like that? I wish. And as a matter of fact, I hope that some of the tests that they've run have been for cases that I've covered. I'd be more than happy to do case cracks where I'm just saying, hey, Parabon did it again. I'm really, really hoping for more good things from them. And finally, to a good old friend of the channel, Cyanide77. By the way, John, it's one of those less mentioned facets, but there was DNA found in the Madeleine McCann case. It's been a long time since I've said that name. That was an early brain scratch for me. Very close to where dogs alerted behind the sofa, which matched the profile of a crime committed in the UK. But as it's unsolved in the UK, we aren't allowed to know what the crime was. Portugal have that profile too, though. Would love to see that one run. I am really interested to see this run on big cases, particularly something like that. But once again, we're getting into that situation. It was a rental property that they were staying in when whatever happened to Madeleine. So DNA that's being found in that area could be questioned in terms of what was its originating source, how long was that DNA sample there. Now, I'm not familiar with the specific set you're talking about. It could be something that was, if I remember right, I think there was some splatter behind the couch that they thought potentially could have been blood, but I thought that was Madeleine's. Oh, you're making my brain go back into an old case. I do hope that they employ this technique more. I do hope that it's going to crack more cases as big as this one. And I know a bunch of you right now are out there shaking your heads going, we already have the answer. We know it was the parents. Well, it'd be great to have some DNA to say that too, wouldn't it? Now, that's another hard thing to track down because, of course, there's going to be transference from the parents all over anything having to do with Madeleine. But that's where we get into these questions about the reliability of the samples they're collecting. It's one thing to say that someone was at a particular place. It's another thing to say they were there at that time doing that thing. All right, everyone, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Before we go, I do want to thank one special person that made a PayPal donation. Her name is Lori. I don't know if she wants me to release her last name, but you have probably seen her in the comments as Ms. Mystery. Thank you so much for the support via PayPal, Lori. I truly appreciate it. If any of you out there want to support me on Patreon or PayPal, all you have to do is go to thenewlordandarts.com. Made it really easy. A couple of big buttons up at the top there that you can click on, or if you want, buy some merchandise, maybe a Brain Scratch shirt, maybe a Searchlight coffee mug. I don't have it here at the desk, unfortunately. I'm going to have to show it to you guys sometime. I really dig it. But thank you for supporting the channel in any way that you do. If that's with views, if that's with watching the ads or skipping the ads, if it's with comments, if it's with likes, even if it's with dislikes. I really appreciate the engagement. Thank each and every one of you. Take care, and I'll see you back here on Wednesday with a brand new Searchlight.